Perfect. Recording room. Episode 6.
Probably.
Most likely.
Yeah.
I'm Riley.
This is Nathan.
And we got another guest finally.
Hello.
This is Jared.
Jared Lalick. Is that how you pronounce your last name?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I heard once someone pronounce it Leek.
That's wrong. Yeah.
That's wrong.
Lalick.
Yeah. Yeah.
It gets thrown around, but Lalick's good.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
It's like a traditional Australian name, right?
Yeah. Hungarian.
Hungarian.
Yeah.
How long have you been in this area?
I've been in the north since 2012, spring of 2012. Yeah.
And before coming here, were you practicing physiotherapy back in Australia?
Yeah.
Or somewhere else?
Yep, so I graduated in November 2010 from the University of Queensland in Brisbane and worked in Brisbane private practice for pretty much 1 year and then decided to pack up and move to Canada. I had a bit of a hiatus, 4 or 5 month hiatus in Revelstoke, and then had a job lined up with Mike in Houston at Total Physio, and started that in May. So that kind of came up on a whim. Didn't know anything about the North at all, and came up after the season and kind of got thrown right into the deep end, which was good, professionally and personally. Yeah.
Did you initially go to Revelstoke because of like the snowboarding, skiing culture there?
Yep.
Right. So that had reputation to you while you're in Australia.
Yeah. Purely to ski bum.
Right.
It was my dad gave me the hot tip. He's from Whistler,
Gotcha.
Vancouver Whistler, and he told me to go there. That was his idea. So that was a good idea. It was a good place to spend 5 months.
You had visited prior to, though, right?
Not Revelstoke. I've been to Canada plenty of times.
Yeah.
I'm half Canadian, so
Okay.
like all my dad's family's in Canada. So we came over lots as kids, back and forward, and got a taste for it and learnt the ways of winter and kind of got hooked on snowboarding. And so my decision was to come here and try and form a life around being kind of a ski bum, which
You've done not bad on it so far.
kind of worked out. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what?
You got seasons pass this year, don't you?
Yeah.
For cutting all the wood.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, tree plating. So managed to wrangle one that way.
Nice.
But yeah, I've had a seasons pass every year since 2011, so it's been nice. 12 years of seasons passes.
Eventually there'll be enough snow to go up.
Yeah.
Do you feel like being a powder bone yourself, like, do you feel like that helps you in your professional context? Could you do as good a job as a physiotherapist working with snowboarders and skiers if you were not, a powder whore yourself?
Maybe it's a good question. Like, because I work with a lot of people who do things that I don't do, and I think it definitely gives me a leg up with the snowboarding and skiing, just because you understand it a little more.
Totally.
But we do a lot of analysing jobs and, looking at things that we don't do and looking at the biomechanics and figuring it out anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it probably does give me a leg up, but I think we'd figure it out anyway.
Gotcha.
Like I work with people that play golf and I don't play golf, and I work with people that play hockey and I don't play hockey, and if you can have a good enough conversation and break things down, you can usually, as a physio, figure out what is needed.
Right.
Maybe not from a performance standpoint, but from a rehab and injury standpoint.
Gotcha.
You kind of get there.
Do you think, though, that because you participate in a sport and just like the body awareness needed, especially in like snowboarding or skiing, that helps you better understand other sports? Like, do you think a physio that was didn't really do much sport, just was good at said craft, went to school, learned all the things that you need to know, would be as successful as someone that had some sort of like sporting context background?
Yeah. No. I think having a sporting background helps in physio. I think having an injury history helps, and then understanding what's needed for activity, for getting ready for it, for doing it, for dealing with injuries when they happen. I mean, it's when you look at like the population of physiotherapists or the demographics, I don't know the stats, but most of them, 90-something% are active people who play sports. It's very rare that you'll meet a physio who's never done sports. It kind of like leads people into the profession.
Yeah.
And so I think it inherently helps.
Yeah.
100%. I can't imagine. I'm trying to think like who I knew who was a physio who wasn't sporty, and there's a few people I'm thinking back, and I'm not sure. I think it would probably be a disadvantage. Having that personal experience gives you insight, gives you maybe even just like empathy. You can just get on someone's level and understand and what it's all like to be on the receiving end of it. And keep on doing it. I keep doing stuff, keep getting hurt. It's good experience as a clinician to like.
Do you think that is a big thing for like the empathy side? Like I know me and Nathan have talked before where like I had a hard time understanding like someone that had back pain before, like until I hurt my back a little bit, and then I'm like, oh, I can see why like they had these emotions come out of it, not just like the pain or lack of range, but like these emotional effects from it. Do you think that's part of it?
For sure. Yeah, I think it's like anything. Your experiences that you've had shape the way that you look at things and do things, and makes certain people more relatable. And it's probably part of the natural filtering process. That's why certain physios get into certain things. They have experiences that lead them there. I've never hurt my knees. I see plenty of people with knee injuries. I've had knee pain, but I've never had, an ACL repair, for example. So I think, it's realistic to say that I might not understand that injury at the level of someone who has, and that's something, it's an interesting point, but I'd definitely say that's a thing.
What was it about like, I think Canadians, we think about Australia as having a plethora of like its own sort of unique sports to participate in. What was it about North Canadian sport? Like, what was it about, the power culture that provided something that you couldn't find, like surfing or,
Well, I grew up surfing and playing soccer, so football, soccer. I want the snowboarding lure came from coming over and experiencing it. There's a natural surfing snowboarding relationship. One plays into the other. When I experienced snowboarding and the culture of it and just the whole thing, I got hooked pretty quick.
Right.
Definitely wasn't like a physio decision. Like when I decided I want to go do more snowboarding and live in Canada, I wasn't doing the physio maths. I was sort of doing the lifestyle maths first, and then on the back end going, all right, can I build my career around this?
Right, that makes sense.
And it was probably, subconsciously it was implicit that there's like a physio industry that, exists in ski towns naturally. It's just what it comes with it. And I was kind of lucky that it did sort of fall into place.
Gotcha.
But I wouldn't have moved anywhere that didn't have a ski hill. That was the purpose of coming. So it kind of complemented the physio profession for sure. Yeah.
If our mountain continued to not get a lot of snow, would you move?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, fair. It's interesting though. So like, the topic about how much your own personal hobbies or your own personal injuries, how that relates to the quality of your care. It's really funny. I think both of us have experienced this, and I'm sure that you've experienced it in a clinical context as well. Well, we'll get so many clients with some injury, and they'll have been told at some point down the line by some person in a medical field that they will never be able to do the thing they love ever again. I've had so many clients that have been told that. And, if there's like a sport that you like absolutely love, and your profession, whether it's a chiro, physio, doctor who just like says, sorry, you can't do that anymore. You kind of go like, man, did that practitioner like consider what that hobby like meant to that person when they delivered such like a gut-wrenching line? Whereas like for someone like yourself, where you kind of breathe powder, you can kind of hold that delicate balance of, you may not be able to do what you love now, but you love what you love, so let's get you back to what you love. Does that element of your own appreciation for your hobbies kind of help you interact with people when they're like, I will not give up this sport?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you gotta, I think when it's a huge problem, when practitioners talk to someone and probably coming from a good place, saying to someone like, this might cause you more injury, this might cause you more pain and harm, so therefore maybe you shouldn't do it. It's an issue, especially if it's not well thought out or executed very well. Sometimes it's said a bit too quick.
Right.
Bit of an offhand thing, there can be some old thoughts there. Great example is telling someone they can't run anymore because they've got arthritis in their knee. We're learning better how impactful our words are and what we say to people, how much what we say to people kind of sticks.
Right.
And I've learned that lesson myself. So I think in time we realize it's really important that we prioritize a person's goals. It's the same mantra we always beat the drum on, is like patient-centered care.
Right.
And so that means start with what the person wants and then work backwards from there, trying to figure out how we can get them to do that.
Right.
And it's pretty rare, really, when you look across the board of injuries, when you really have to tell someone they can't do something.
Right.
Until you've done your due diligence and you've gone through a lot of process and time, you should really shelf that. It should take a long time to get to the conclusion to tell someone they can't do something.
Yeah.
Certainly telling people, I have this conversation a lot, like you might not do as much of it as you want to do.
Sure.
You might not be performing at the level that you want, or setting those times that you want, or whatever it may be. But it's usually not the activity that's the problem, it's the amount of that activity.
Right.
Or maybe the how you're doing it, where it fits in your life.
Right.
So
your progression patterns, things like that.
Yeah, all of that. So it's we've got to remember at the end of the day, like it's people's right to do things that maybe even aren't even good for them.
Right.
That's a good conversation. Like I have that with people all the time. I say, look, like this is what I'm telling you as a physio, but as a person, like you can choose to be reckless. You can, everyone's got a different level of reckless. Here's the risk factor. You do with that what you will.
Right.
People's right to go out and get hurt if they want to.
Right.
It's a choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
So it's that's the center of our job, is to keep people doing what they want, or find ways to kind of work around the problem so they can get at least some of that done.
Yeah. That is definitely one of the things that I find inspiring about not explicitly Paralympians, but like watching someone who loves hockey, and then all of a sudden they have this crazy health issue or injury, and then they're like, oh, I'm going to go play like sledge hockey or something. That makes a lot of people's excuses, or a lot of the excuses that practitioners provide around why you need to stop doing that practice, as kind of irrelevant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In very specific to Smithers context, my view is we have a pretty active population in the Smithers just community as itself. Whether lots of people are here because they like skiing, snowboarding, or there's mountain biking, or there's running. There's all these very outdoor-esque type sports. When you're talking about some of those conversations, maybe someone saying to someone at some point, you can't do this ever again. Do you find in this community specifically, you have to do more reining people back on average, or do you have to have more of the conversation of or just letting them do their thing, or you actually have to pull people back from wanting to do more versus people that come in, I can't do this, my knees, so I'm never doing this again. They're expressing this.
Asking people to dial back versus pushing people to do more.
Yeah.
Concept.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I think Smithers probably has a high percentage of, you call them endurance copers.
Yeah.
People who carry on, who kind of, you look at copers and avoiders, it's kind of can broadly categorize people, right? And if we're talking about people who are in pain. And there's anecdotally speaking, bigger proportion of people here that we do need to rein in a little bit.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of very high performing, very like ambitious people here. A lot of people who get their happiness from physical activity, and so it creates these situations where it's the body and the mind having a battle. Like what people want to do versus what their body's going to let them do, and it's a healthy conversation with people to say like, look, quite often you're not doing anything wrong. You're not doing it wrong. It's just the amount of it that you're doing. It's banging that drum every single day. Is like typically there's a volume of activity versus a capacity relationship, and right now you're not there. And so you talk about pulling back, like and where can we pull back? And I see a lot with adults. Like their 20 to 50 bracket. A lot of very high-end recreational athletes who, for whatever reason, just aren't keeping up with it and are running into problems, and need to have that healthy conversation of like, look, in a monthly spread or a weekly spread, where are we going beyond what your body can handle, and where can we make an adjustment? And it's usually fairly well met. I think like typically people, it's refreshing to have that conversation. Like don't just keep pounding. Like it's okay to have a break. It's all right to regress for a month. Like life is long. You got all your whole life to do this, and a short little pullback isn't the end of the world. Probably harder in the kids, like with the youth, because they're, for different reasons, they're doing a lot of things. They're trying to get the scholarship or just trying to progress in their sport. And there's often multi sports. Smithers is unique for me, and I tell people this a lot, where there are a lot of kids doing a lot of sport at once, and a lot of it's just the seasons and the nature of the geography here. Like it's all got to kind of happen in smaller windows. And that's a hard thing. So we do a lot of talking about like, all right, like, if the conclusion here is we've got to pull back a little bit on all the things you're doing, what's more important to you? What can we regress on? Is it school PE? Is it, basketball instead of volleyball? What's most important, and where can we push? And it can be a hard conversation, but it's back to the old sports science. It's not always easy, but it's just part of the job.
I wonder if, I don't know, with you in Brisbane, for the year that you were there, do you think it was much of a difference there? Like you would have, in that first year there practicing, do you feel like you had to push more people you saw in more of, I'm assuming it was a bit more of like an urban setting versus like rural, like, and I'm wondering even like rural community to rural community, like is Smithers this like hot spot of people more that you might have to pull back versus say another rural area? And I don't know if you know the question, the answer to it, but like, are we just this hot spot, and if you go to these other spots, you have to actually try and push people to like, hey, your knee has quote unquote this issue here, maybe let's like, hey, we can't do your ultra marathon this week now, but
or even like compared to when you were working in Houston.
I think there's like more of a culture of recreational physical activity here in Smithers compared to like possibly Houston, just because of the facilities in a way. Maybe looking broader, like out into the north, there's many communities that don't have, a cross-country ski club, and they don't have a ski hill and a river, and maybe as big of a high school with as many programs. So yes, Smithers does specifically have a bit of the challenge where there's a lot going on, and I see sometimes people basically trying to do too much. Not too much, in the big picture, but maybe too much this week, this month. And it's a compliment, like it's a hats off to the people that are doing it and to the area. But I say to people, the body does what it wants, right? It doesn't matter what your goals and agenda are. Like it's gonna react irrespectively. So Smithers has got a few unique patterns. The Bulkley Valley broader, like I think there was a lot of that in Houston. There was a lot of the same sort of thing. Recreational athletes that pushed hard. A little more of like a workforce, like an industrial workforce there that kind of played into it differently. It's interesting when you look across the board in different towns. Brisbane, I was in the outer suburbs of a city there, and it was probably just the point in my career. You know, I was a newbie, I was a freshman, so I would see a lot of kind of less athletic people.
Yeah.
And so that gets a lot more into that, like, let's get you going versus let's pull you back.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I still think the bulk of our profession, if you're doing general practice, you know, and I think here we're still in general practice, is still probably more let's get you going than let's pull you back.
Yeah.
You know, if you're in a niche of more of like a sports clinic or, you know, working with a sports team, it's more the opposite.
Yeah.
And that's the, you know, there's differences between recreational activity and stress load versus planned activity and stress load, you know, and finding that balance. So, and that goes across both people who are doing too much and too little, or are more and less active. That recreational workload versus or incidental workload versus planned workload, you know, two different things, and a balance there is important.
Yeah.
And we spend a lot of time talking about that, if that makes sense.
No, for sure.
The difference between incidental and planned, like specific to, can you go into that?
Yeah, good examples, like a great one's firewood. So, you know, every fall, you know, is like people here, you know, August, firewood season starts, their back starts hurting. I talk to them about, you know, how maybe we should do some exercises to get your back more ready for lifting, as an example, and the responses were like, I already, you know, I lift firewood, I move hay bales, I do stuff at home, I garden, and that's all your incidental physical activity. You can put it under the banner of vocational physical activity.
I like that.
Yeah, and then from
think about it.
And from like a injury occurrence perspective, like if there's a huge imbalance where there's more incidental or vocational physical activity or stress load, we see a higher incident injury rate if there's less planned physical activity. So the higher the vocational load or the incidental load, so people who have harder jobs or have to do harder things get punished more if they're not doing the background work. So you know, the strength and conditioning, you know, the weekly kind of maintenance exercise to keep their body up to speed for that. And it's a cruel principle, but it's well researched now, you know, that the harder you work and the harder your job is, the more you got to work in the background to kind of keep things at bay.
Right.
And what's my point there? That does manifest quite a bit here, because you can kind of relate that to, like, you know, play and activity.
Totally.
You know, pickleball's an interesting one.
I played pickleball last night.
Pickleball's great. It's fantastic, and people are getting out and doing it. But we're seeing a lot of people, like, the other analogy I'm using is like you're showing up for the game on the weekend, but you didn't go to training during the week. Yeah. And you start blowing up, right? Your body's just not ready. And it kind of sucks. It's a shitty sort of principle, but you know, it's pretty well founded now.
Yeah, it's super common for us to interact with people where they're like, oh yeah, I don't really need to do any strength conditioning or specific exercises because I'm like physically active all the time. And I find that we'll call it typical athletes, like hockey or soccer players, they're much more receptive to strength conditioning. But our outdoorsy athletes, like our adventure athletes, like skiers and hikers and rock climbers, they're way more adverse to the concept of strength conditioning. How do you like rope people in, or what's the buy-in for like trying to explain to someone who can't picture themselves exercising indoors to like, help them?
Minimum effective dose.
Right on. Minimum effective dose.
There you go.
Yes, sir.
Like, let's
put that on my story today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Let's
check out Coach Kosh on Instagram.
Did you put a research article up?
No, it was just like a little quote about how most people are looking for like the minimum effective dose, not the maximum tolerable dose.
Yeah.
Like your average person. Yeah.
And so, I mean, like, different worlds, like, you guys are in performance, so people are looking for the maximum effective dose if they're getting serious, right? Mm-hmm. People who come to see me want to know what's the least I've got to do so I don't keep hurting. Mm-hmm. You know, fair enough. I don't fault anyone for that. And so what was the question? So that's part of the conversation. I say to people, you know, matter-of-factly, like, doing the thing all the time isn't generally enough to condition you for the thing. especially when you're dealing with extra physical factors, So it's all well and good if your client schedule's the same and everything at home's the same and your diet's the same and nothing changes with work. But as soon as there's a glitch in the system, you hit a bunch of stress, you get sick, your sleep's interrupted, you decide you're going to do a 3-day mission that's way more than what you're prepared for. Your body's ability to tolerate that goes out the window, or your body gets overloaded, right? So the point of background training is to raise your tolerance bar. And I like telling people, I like saying a mantra I like to use, it just sounds good to me when it rolls off the tongue, is like, let's just make you harder to hurt.
Yeah.
And it's harder to hurt you. And then I usually have to give a very lengthy, detailed description of why strength and conditioning, particularly, strength work, has a good effect for injury prevention. And then I start delving into the research, and then I start talking about it, right? And it's not my opinion, just what the research shows. It's
sure.
Physiological principles. So, and that's that whole idea of yes, show up and play when you can, and if you can get away with it, great. But when you stop getting away with it, you got to do that background work,
right?
And it usually comes up, most of my patients are over 25, unless they've had a traumatic injury. So if we're dealing with pain conditions or overuse injuries, it's usually a bit later in life, and that's just when the body's, you're just not getting away with it anymore.
Right.
Like when we're younger, we can show up and play, and actually for the most part you do get away with it if we're talking about injury prevention. A bit different for performance, but but there's no coincidence that most people that walk into a physio clinic are over 25, over 30. It's just because the body's adaptability slows down.
Nathan's there.
Yeah, dude, I'm 27.
You've never felt more over 25.
For sure, dude. Like the moment I turned 27, all of a sudden my knees and my tendons are all hurting. I my last.
Welcome.
Yeah, it sucks. I do a little bit of boxing or whatever, and my ankles start hurting. Like I remember last winter I played a bit more squash, and I just remember being like, wow, my ankles suck. Like I'm not likely to improve my tendon health by playing squash. I'm either just going to not stress them or I'm just going to destroy them. Like I don't.
Yeah, but if you'd done like a 3-month preparatory, squash program, and then you'd graded your exposure into squash over a 6 to 8 week period, you would have been fine.
Yeah, squash is a go hard sport. It's it's a bunch of people like me who are like, oh yeah, I competitively swam. That probably means that my reaction time for my ankles is really good. And it turns out to not be the case. Yeah. But I think that would be like a good thing to hear from yourself, being like a powder bomb yourself. Like you've got this beautiful gym in your clinic, but you're also, you're a snowboarder. I'm sure you'd rather spend time snowboarding than working out in the gym. So I feel like that would go well coming from you. Whereas I feel like I go, come to the gym. People look at me and they're like, you're a big head. And
you're always in the gym.
Yeah, exactly.
Of course you say that.
Yeah, exactly. So it probably from us, it comes across as I love lifting weights as much as I love snowboarding, which is not true. But for you, I think that juxtaposition is a little bit more, linear.
Yeah, and I mean, sometimes people will receive what you're telling them. Sometimes when I tell people that a strength and conditioning program is going to protect you from injuries so you can do more of what you want to do. You don't have to live in the gym, once or twice a week. If you work into the right intensity, it's enough. You get uptake, Some people they kind of got to get spanked to see that it works, right?
For sure.
And there's anomalies, you meet people and they've done nothing, no training, no background stuff, play all the way and they get through, and that's humans, right? They're variable.
So they wake up with a cigarette in their mouth.
Yeah, totally fine. Yeah, nothing ever hurts, right?
Yeah.
Die happy.
Yeah.
So it's a mix. Some people need to find out themselves, and I see lots of people. A lot of what I do now, what I like doing is people who have tried everything,
right.
And they've gone a few seasons where, for skiing, for example, where none of it's worked.
Right.
None of the quote unquote easier stuff has worked. It's we're back to these principles that we knew 25 years ago, and we're just putting them back into place. Nothing really has been rewritten. When you look at load preparation and strength and conditioning for injury prevention, the research is no different these days than it was 20, 25 years ago. It's all being recycled.
Do you feel like, even though the research is the same, do you feel like as you've worked year after year, like the physical composition of like kids, I think youth especially, have you like noticed like physical degradations generation to generation, or would you say that like in general kids are dealing with the exact same like physical injuries and health properties that they were 5 years ago or 10 years ago? Were you here 10 years ago?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it probably hasn't been long enough for me to notice. I'm trying to think, like, were kids different 10 years ago? There's still high sedentary rates, you know, like TV instead of phones these days.
Mm-hmm.
I can't, I don't know. I can't answer that one well. Sorry.
Yeah.
I haven't noticed a difference, but I might also not be observing enough.
Sure.
But I think they're more aware, like, which is nice. Maybe it's just a bubble we're in here because there's more services, but I think in general, and I've seen this across the board, not just kids, but everyone, is that everyone's more aware that like going to the gym has benefits beyond just like growing muscle.
Mm-hmm.
You know, resistance training is not about putting on muscle mass all the time, or, you know, it has other massive benefits. And I think that's just, you know, we're getting through, we're promoting it so much that finally, you know, stuff's landing. You know, the World Health Organization integrating in the resistance training into the you know, the health recommendations. Like, that wasn't that long ago that they did that.
Oh yeah.
That was pretty recent.
Yeah, that was very recent. Yeah.
That helps. You know, just awareness. It's amazing. It's amazing how persistent some of the old taboos and stereotypes or stigmas, I guess is better to say, about resistance training still exist.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like still hear frequently that resistance training is going to make me stiff and it's going to wear this out and that out. And, you know, anything can cause harm if it's not dialed right. But
we've had we've had youth athletes in a variety of sports where their parents have like essentially told us, the strength conditioning coaches, that they're not allowed to lift a certain amount because they're afraid their kids are going to get injured.
Or the stunt your growth.
That's
a huge one.
Totally. But these kids, like the forces that are impacting their body in their sports is like so much more extreme than like any deadlifting or power cleans
like
that they're doing.
What clip is a 11-year-old in like giant slalom going down the hill at, and they wipe out, versus 110-pound deadlift when they're a 120-pound human?
Yeah, for sure.
Like it's not even like close.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, it's a little bit of dinosaur, isn't it? Will die, need to die. Like, there's some old opinions that need to just go in time. And some of those old ideas are just hanging on, and that's normal. That's gonna evolve. It's getting better. I've seen that in my career. You know, things I was saying 10 years ago. You know, like it's you know, 180 degrees, right?
Yeah.
Just because bolus of knowledge, it leaks through eventually. You know, it's coming.
Could you give an example of that?
Oh yeah, like shrugs. I used to tell people shrugs were terrible for them. Now I give them out like candy. You know, like lots of things.
I feel about that, like Jefferson curls.
Yeah, there you
like,
go.
People were like, never flex your spine.
Yeah.
And now it's like, well, your spine's meant to flex. So.
Yeah, that's still a spicy argument, but
in certain contexts.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, but the argument for the pro Jefferson curl is much stronger than the latter. Right. Like, I mean, again, now we have, especially physios, we have the luxury of a brilliant research, like a brilliant body of research. It's and like the rise of social media has made it even better.
Right.
You know, like we have so much at our fingertips where like we don't even have to read the papers anymore as much. Like there's people who summarize it and package it and you know, distill all of that stuff, and that's their job, and it's great, and it's significantly better than it was, you know, 10 years ago, better than it was 5 years ago. So that's a lovely thing, and I think probably that's one of the strongest things about physio is the researchers behind it, like the non-clinicians who are giving us this information, and you know, it's brilliant. It's a luxury, really. We're lucky that way.
That's interesting because, like, you know, that's a very I don't think it's an inaccurately optimistic way of looking at social media, but it definitely is like a more optimistic way that a lot of people look at it. Where, you know, someone can go on social media and one person can learn, you know, oh, you don't need to do a barbell bench press. Like, that's not a mandatory exercise. But then another person can, you know, go on social media and they can learn that they'll just never be able to get leaner because it's not their, like, because they're hormone type alpha 3 or whatever the hell you see. And so, like, do you feel like you could, like, what are the like things that you see on social media that are like the flash physiotherapy where it's like a quick sell, but there's like no substance to it?
Oh, majority of it.
If you're thinking
pretty
like
rough out there.
If you're thinking like a population of people that are just like going on Instagram and going like, well, I should do this or I shouldn't do that. Like, would you see any patterns of things that like could be
anything absolute? Like, I'll say that, I guess. If anyone says this is it, do this because this is it.
Right.
There is very little in physiotherapy that's black and white.
Right.
Almost nothing. You know, in injury, and when you're looking at injury management, rehab, all of it, there is very, very little that is black and white.
Right.
So when someone says, you know, do this to fix your stiff hips,
right,
give it a go, by all means, right? But
it's not like the be all end all.
No, like for every exercise there is out there, there's another 10 you can do that might actually help too.
Yeah.
So there's nothing wrong with offering people ideas. Like, I'm all for it. Like, yeah, a cool stretch, let's give it a go.
Mm-hmm.
But don't tell people it's going to fix all their problems.
Yeah.
You know, that's just there is unfortunately if you go through like the physio, chiro, rehab, injury, social media, there's far more bullshit than there is truth.
Sure.
You know, and
for sure.
And it's like a lot of things, like the bullshit sells.
Yeah.
You know, people want absolutes and they want answers, and fair enough. If you're injured and you're in pain and you're stressed and you just need an answer, you're gonna like migrate towards someone who looks good and sounds good and has seems to have a good argument for doing this thing, and has someone who's sitting there telling you that it fixed them.
Yeah.
Not to say it didn't. It's just each body's different, each situation's different. So we've got to be broad. We've got to be able to be critical. You know.
Yeah.
And
confidence is charismatic as well. Like, if someone says something confidently enough, people will believe it.
Oh yeah. And unfortunately, a lot of the charlatans out there are very charismatic, very well spoken. You know, they can make nice videos. So there's not a lot out there.
Like that.
Good thing we can't make a nice video.
yeah. That's why we've intentionally kept our quality as shitty as possible.
Keep it ghetto. There's a lot, like not a ton of it's harmful. The worst thing is making people more paranoid about their body and make them feel like they're fragile and that they can't push in and do things they want because they've got some imaginary movement disorder or whatever it is, you know. And that sucks, you know. Yeah, and you see, and then these people forget how much it sinks in, you know. Like, you meet someone 10 years later after they've talked to someone and they're still holding on to that opinion, whatever it is.
That label.
Yeah, and they might be, you know, like I've met people who aren't aren't doing a sport they want because they're worried about something happening that someone told them might happen.
Yeah, totally.
You know, they're not in pain, hasn't happened again.
Yeah.
It was probably an offhand comment. And I've done it myself, I know for sure. You know, I think back and I'm like, there's definitely some people out there who've still repeating something I said that probably wasn't correct. You know? And that's where just self-analysis, being self-critical is important. And that's the purpose of research, right? Is like for us to sit back and go, all right, like this challenges what we think and our beliefs, and let's review how we do this. And if you're not being self-critical, you know, you've got to question the integrity of what you're doing. Yeah. You know?
I think even if you're on the other side of the spectrum, not just people selling the definitive answer, but people saying that they're like nihilism, like there is no answer. Like I think about, there's a lot of that on social media too. A lot of that. Yeah, like I think about like how when I had my concussion and then I went through GX Strong and I went through Northern Brain Injury Association right next door and I did different varying forms of treatment of my concussion, like got a lot better. And then when I started working with people with concussions, the amount of people that I met that were told at some point in life that there's no, you got a concussion, there's nothing anyone can do about it. Just go home and sit in a dark room, and like the people get like pigeonholed into these like ideas of a proper solution, but they haven't like spoken to their clinician. They haven't like gone to a reputable physio or chiro or doctor. They receive that message and then they take treatment into their own hands, which is
pigeonholing. You get pigeonholed, right?
Yeah.
And it can be hard on people. Yeah, people that are isolated and don't have a lot of exposure to someone who might give a different perspective. They end up doing the same thing over and over and just don't get anywhere, right? So it comes back to like we've got to treat people before we treat anything else, right? We're not treat people for injuries. Corny thing to say, but it's a good bump, good drum to beat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of looking at the consistent injury sites or the consistent like health issues that you see in working in a rural community, what would you say are like, what should we say, like a top 3? Well, like if you have 2 others, like maybe 5.
Yeah, like, and I know we kind of wanted to add on that. We wanted to talk about like the changing of the season, because we have 4 seasons here versus maybe other spots. And like
rain.
Yeah, and like you'd already spoke about like some people have to go and chop wood for their house. I can think of like snow shoveling.
Oh man, my back always hurts when I shovel.
Yeah, like what are some what do you call it, like vocational exercise? Or that's almost just like lifestyle exercise, like you have to do it because of our like what are some common injuries that you see, and maybe even like the changing of the season for like sports. What are like 2 or 3 that are just like they always, if you don't do Nathan's 3-month snowboard, there's a promo for Nathan.
Nathan's 3-month snowboard program.
Just a quick
$99.99 12-week program.
If you don't do maybe some of the stuff that you talked about, like leading into it, like prepping yourself, whatever that might look like for the individual, like what are those injuries or sports or those activities that you like commonly do see?
Yeah, like by time of year, eh? So, in the fall, this time of year, there's a lot of back pain. A lot of back pain now in the spring, I think. Yeah. Well, not now, sorry, the fall, late summer. We see a lot of back pain, and it's probably like accumulative stuff from the summer. Just kind of, there's a natural tendency to do a lot of just play in the summer. Fair enough, especially here. The weather's good and you get it
out on the lake.
Yeah. So there's a bit of like accumulative strain, and falling over here and there, doing whatever in the summer, bike crashes and stuff. So I see a spike of back pain then in the fall, early winter maybe. This time of year, maybe when people are a little less active, as winter kicks in. And then the spring, certainly, there's a spike in back pain with gardening season. This is all purely anecdotal.
It's like garden.
I mean, like the big injuries.
Yeah. I kneel down and I start pulling green things. I go, oh, this sucks.
It's crazy what gardening does to people. But that's an example of like just going and all of a sudden doing something.
Yeah.
If you haven't been kneeling down and bending over and pulling on things for the whole year, and then you go do it for 2 months, like stuff happens, right?
It's never only for like an hour either. You probably are out there for a day or a whole weekend.
Well, that's
and you got to get it done, and that's the same as firewood. You got to get it done.
Yeah,
like, it's not like you're going like, I'm going to do an hour of this. Like you do, it's like
I got 14 hours of this, so I can heat my home.
I do it. I'm like, all right, it's firewood season. I want to get this over as quick as possible. So 3 14-hour days.
Yeah, no one's like substituting like med ball slams with, here's how many blocks of wood I'm going to cut. Like,
no, exactly. And I don't think you need, but back to your question, like injury, I don't really want to say exactly, like, because I just don't have good data. Like, I'm just going off the top of my head. I think the top injuries would be shoulders, like, let's say strains of the shoulder. There's a few under that. Back strains, back injuries, which would be, anything from mid back down to the back of the knees, and knees, like patellofemoral pain is so common, or kneecap pain. Those would be
like come springtime and like snow's gone and
in the transition periods. Yeah, definitely like those are
like the runner that hasn't ran and does like something like that, or what?
Yeah, like a good example is like someone who like is very fit and they cross country ski all winter, and so they have a high cardiovascular capacity, and then they get into summer. And right off the bat, it's like 10K run.
Oh man,
because their cardio is bombing.
We can
see that all the time.
So many people that are like that.
And then patellofemoral pain, sucks. Not serious, but sucks.
Yeah.
Slows down your training. That's super common. That's like a very common pattern. You see it. I think you see it less the other way. I think running prepares people better for skiing, or skiing's not as impactful as running probably. But then ski season, early ski season, interesting ones are like hip flexors, like front of hips, side of hips.
Oh
You
yeah,
got like your cross country skiers,
totally,
and your ski tourers.
Oh yeah.
And who in the hell does hip flexor strengthening exercises? Crazy.
How boring.
Yeah, they suck. But then you go out and you do 10,000 hip flexion reps with your leg plus a ski, and if you're ski touring particularly, another 20 pounds of, well not 20, 5 pounds of snow on the ski.
Yeah.
or like if you're snowshoeing.
Snowshoeing, oh man, yeah.
Gosh.
Right.
4 steps in, I'm like, oh!
Yeah, and so
And
it's
you're out like this.
yeah, for sure.
and shoulders are like more of a summer thing, I think. I'm trying to think, more sport related, general activity related. Winter, people generally are a bit more chilled. And if you talk in the population, generally people that deal with non-traumatic shoulder injuries are 40 and up, 45 and up, more that middle-aged population to the senior population, and it's a repetitive stress injury, and that's very much like a lack of preparation issue. Shoulders the majority of shoulder injuries are extremely easy to prevent if you just do upper body work, aside from something weird happening, like an event.
Yeah.
Non-trauma, like repetitive strain shoulder injuries theoretically should be super easy to prevent.
Like if someone did push-ups and pull-ups in their own home, they'd probably be able to avoid a lot of shit.
Yeah, task specific, general strength, rows, press, a row, a pull, a press, a lift.
Yeah.
To be a carry.
Yeah.
A little bit maybe task specific. But you got someone who does no arm exercise for 3 months, and then they go and start digging holes in the garden. It's just, you're going from couch to sprint. It's just unfortunately asking for trouble.
Yeah.
And that's an example of you didn't do anything wrong except just not get yourself ready.
Oh man, this is a very weird and anecdotal experience, but a lot of the relationships that I've developed with some of the indigenous groups in the area when it comes to salmon season is just this 1 month of just dense movements, so much volume, and the amount of indigenous elders that I've just had anecdotal conversations with that have some form of carpal tunnel syndrome, because the month of August they just go hard, and that's the main month. It's super interesting.
Well, that's again, it's well founded as spikes in physical load create at least overstress injuries, pain injuries, but sometimes real injuries, right?
Oh.
A lot of injuries is just tissue talking, overstressed, and you get some pain. Might not be damaged, but yeah, exactly. And that's across the board. If you look at, if you spread out all the injuries on a table and you look at the story behind them, if there's not trauma, most of the time, there's some spike in, physical stress usually,
right,
that was not familiar, and away you go, right?
So we have this group of people here in the north where they go hard at one task and then they go hard at another task. It's physiologically very similar, but locomotively very different, and they'll have all these tendon issues. But how about these groups of people in the north where maybe they have their summer hobby, or even if it's just going for a walk, and come winter it's too cold, they're not going for walks anymore. You think about a lot of mums and Smithers always pushing strollers up and down and get a lot of exercise, and that winter comes, you're not biking, you're not pushing strollers, you're slipping on ice. Do you feel like you have a large group of population that you work with where it's these massive time chunks where they're just not moving at all because of the seasons.
Yeah, hugely. Yeah, it's I can't say enough about that. It's a massive problem. You know, like the winter for a lot of people means doing a whole lot less,
Mm-hmm.
and it's hard to get around that. You know, trying to have strategies for people to just be consistent. You know, but keep it rolling all year round.
Yeah.
And that's probably, you know, that's what places with warmer climates have for their, you know, that's what's better for their population.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have the data on hand, but I mean, you know, you compare health indicators across the board, musculoskeletal, cardiovascular, you know, mental for sure, in populations where they can consistently do things year round, you know, especially the stuff they want to do, walking or whatever, versus not, like there's a, you know, I can say anecdotally with my observations, there's a massive difference.
Right.
Yeah.
You see it, it's subtle, a bit more subtle in like the more middle-aged kind of populations, but it's very obvious in the senior populations.
Totally.
Like these, you know, people who are of older age and they're great and active through the summer and then it all drops off in the winter and it's just, a lot of things go south quick.
Yeah. Yeah, the concept that I've been like pitching a lot of like my older populations is, you know, we think about how, like when we work with kids, like time chunks like summers or a school year is such a large proportion of their life. But you get this group of people that are like, you know, plus 75, and you could also calculate it as like the last couple of years you have of your life. Every winter that goes by is also a large percentage of your life. And if you're like, oh, I have 10 years now that I'm going to be alive for, you know, half of that time, because here half that time is spent in snow, half that time not moving, that's like a wicked amount of time to like talk about like shortening your run.
Counting against, yeah.
Yeah. Like you don't have like, you can't
60
afford
other years.
Yeah, you can't afford
up
to have 6 months of sitting and doing nothing out of every year if you have like 10 years left to live.
Sounds like we need a multiplex.
Sounds like we need a place. I like the fat bike thing. I like that wasn't a thing when I grew up here, and then coming back after university and being like, wow, man, fat bikes have taken off. Talk about like a nice little way of keeping people physically active.
Oh yeah, for sure. And people, the problem is having little bites taken out of it gradually. You can see it sort of getting better, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a huge issue, and I think everyone knows the solution. It's just how do we get there, right?
Right.
You know, keep people active year round. Great. Put that on the corkboard. Let's like figure out how to get there. And that's the whole other battle with that. You know, I think there's an awareness now. I think there's the nice thing about exercise is it's no longer like this exclusive thing, or it's just meant for certain people.
Totally.
You know, I think everyone knows now. It's like, you know what, like, you know, this is eating your veggies. Like, let's just kind of let's do this because there's bigger benefits.
Yeah.
And we got good data now. I mean, I think the World Health Organization guidelines are brilliant, like clear as day. Like that's, you know, with the numbers off the top of my head, it's, what do they say? 370, what is it? 150 minutes of 180 minutes of moderate, and then 130 of vigorous or something. Cardiovascular.
I think it's just 180 of moderate to vigorous.
A week.
Yeah.
Which is
Nothing. That's
Yeah.
so
It's
little
a lot.
time.
it's not that bad.
No.
And then
And you can scale that down.
1 to 2 times strength.
Strength training, yeah.
Strength
But I mean, just get the cardiovascular done, especially if we're talking, you know, to begin with.
Yeah.
And that's like, all right, we need people to walk. Like, think of all these people, and start with the people that want to do it. People that don't want to do it, we're going to help, you know, we want to help them too, but that's a bit harder. That'll take a bit more strategy.
Yeah.
But the people who want to do it just don't have the place to do it. Like, you know, it's not easy, but it's an easy principle.
Yeah.
You know, let's get something there so they can do it, right? So, yeah.
You feel like it's a resource thing, or do you feel like it's like a behavioral thing primarily?
Well, it's always behavioral, but if you facilitate it, like that's like my job. Like, it's not my job to tell you off for not doing your exercises. It's my job to make it easy for you to do your exercises. Yeah. Like, let's make this suit you, because like telling people they're going to do it doesn't work. We know that.
Yeah,
right? Like,
for sure.
Yeah.
But creating a situation where it's attractive and it's meaningful,
Yeah.
and it's not there's as fewer barriers as possible.
Yeah.
It's relatively convenient. It's not expensive.
Yeah.
There's a social aspect. That's what makes exercise successful.
Yeah.
It's not going to work all the time, but it's our job to make it as approachable as possible.
Yeah, we had a good conversation on one of our podcasts, probably 2 or 3, about the social dynamics of creating like exercise habits, and just you talked about the example of like how families would make the habit of, in the same neighborhood, they would all walk to school together with their kids.
Walk in school bus.
It's a little bit harder to do in the wintertime.
Yeah.
But
The snowshoe school bus.
yeah,
Well, maybe not snowshoe. No.
fat tire school bus, I
Yeah.
guess,
Yeah.
definitely harder to do in the wintertime, but if I think that the more people that would be willing to do that, the more appealing it's going to be for people who are maybe less likely to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, doing something you don't actually want to do that's hard and unpleasant sucks when you're alone.
Yes.
Suffering's much better in company.
Yeah.
Big time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, like, I think about how, like, up here, well, I don't know what that was. Up here, like, kids, if you're walking to school, like, you could be walking to school, like, in the dark, which is crazy, like, compared to other areas in the world where, like, 8 a.m., it's still pretty dark out. Talk about, like, a compounding factor of not making it easy to do something that you naturally wouldn't want to do even if there was sunlight.
Yeah.
It's like, what we should do? We should go for a walk when it's cold and dark and miserable. Doesn't really have, not really a sales point on it.
No.
No, not what I'd like to do. No.
Yeah.
But, lots of ways through that. But walking outside in the cold is not most people's cups of tea.
Yeah.
So, that's where pickleball comes in.
Yeah.
Pickleball's awesome because there's, probably the sport's fun. I've never done it. I'm not a racket guy. But I bet the social aspect of it has a ton to do with it.
Yeah. I played some last night, but I was playing with people that I didn't know very well, so I wasn't like as chirpy as I usually am. I feel like if I played pickleball with you guys, I'd be pretty chirpy.
Trash talk.
Yeah. But it's very social.
Yeah. And there's more happening. I can say that from my end. I can see,
Yeah.
It's developing, but there's ways to go.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. Do you feel like there are other barriers? So we talked about barriers to being healthy in the north. We've talked about geography and things like that, and temperature. Do you feel like there are any barriers that you found as a practitioner, like the resources that are accessible to you in working in a rural context?
Yeah, I mean, facility-wise, we're lucky in Smithers. There's a lot of good stuff here. We've got a good network of health professionals. We've got you guys at the gym, and we've got the great allied health group. Lots of physios people can bounce ideas off. RMTs, the acupuncturists, the chiros, that creates a good network. This sort of inherently, people probably don't talk to each other as much as they should, but it's there.
Yeah.
I think the biggest challenge in the north is probably education and training. Just that you got to fly to Vancouver to go to a course.
Yeah.
Or whatever, but social media and online's helping that. Any of my extra education is at least half of it's online.
Yeah.
So that helps. It's getting much better. I've even seen it since I've been here. There's far more general awareness and, far less of the kind of old school, whatever you want to call it, approach that didn't integrate in everyone's opinion.
TheraBand, no monies.
For example. It's not too bad these days. I don't think being a physio up here has a lot of hardship in Smithers. I think there are the more isolated communities that don't have that kind of network.
Right.
So I work in Burns Lake a bit. That's definitely much more isolated.
Mm-hmm.
These communities that, some of the reserves and you know, your D-Slakes and you know, take your pick, there's lots of them.
Yeah.
You know, Fort Nelson maybe. I don't even know the physios there, but if you're the only physio in a little town,
Yeah.
that's hard stuff.
Yeah.
And I don't think no one's got a good answer for that yet.
Yeah.
You know, that's something that probably will take a whole lot of infrastructure and good networking and time to really make right.
Yeah.
And for allied health, you know, I just think that a lot of communities just miss out. You know,
Yeah.
they have a hard enough time getting basic medicine, let alone like rehab input and health and wellness and all these things. It's a luxury that many communities don't afford. Smithers doesn't have that problem, but many communities don't have it.
Yeah. It's hard to get physios out to those communities. Also, like in the winter, those communities don't want to travel somewhere like Smithers.
Yeah.
You don't want to drive 6 hours on an icy road in the winter.
So probably that translates to health indicators being being worse in those areas, and I think there's probably data for that. Isolated communities
For sure.
have poorer health indicators, and I don't
quick
think
access to everything.
Yeah, and I think that's a multifactorial problem. It's
Yeah.
probably not because there's not physios there solely, but like less information.
Health practitioners in general, like less resources in general.
Yeah,
Physios being included in that.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any other questions, Nathan, that you really want to ask?
I think that was it.
The only I'd say just to finish off is there like, hopefully people have seen the space, they know you're here. If they didn't already, they probably did. Is there any specific musculoskeletal injuries you really enjoy working with, or
that you're really skilled at?
You're very skilled at, and like this is the place they should come hang out.
I won't toot my horn. I like working with. There's no injuries I don't like. Concussions aren't my field. I'm not sure. We'll talk to Matt. He might have more experience in concussions. What's my favourite stuff? I like.
Yeah, future guest.
Future guest. Peg him. I like shoulders. I like working with long-term back injuries. You know, teaching people what they can do with their backs and the strength and conditioning angle of it. I like the strength and conditioning angle for everything. It's a nice new dimension that we can throw into people's treatment plans. It's usually complements what people are already doing. Doesn't need to replace what they're doing. Did I say shoulders? I really like working with shoulders. Just done a bit of training on it, and I find them interesting.
Yeah.
That's my phone. Yeah.
It must be that time.
It must be that time. But all sorts. Post-surgical's fun. Hard for me to say. I've always been a general practitioner. I've always treated broad musculoskeletal issues. So I guess those would be my favourite. I know that's not the best answer.
No, it's good.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it goes like one of the things that we always talk about with we're expecting with other guests, but we've said like when you're in these communities, we don't have just a brain surgeon or just like this super specific sports med, knee ACL specific. Like you kind of have to become a jack of all trades.
Yeah.
So like usually you're just like forced into like, oh, this person came to me, they have this weird shoulder thing going on. I have some tools already to help them, but now I gotta dive into it, know more to continue to learn so I can progress this person at maybe not the same rate as some person that only sees rotator cuff people for 10 hours of their day, but you're just forced into that. So I think it's cool to see that commonality of you just have to learn such a larger scope because even though Smithers is lucky, we have that, like you're saying, allied health, we're never gonna have, well, maybe not never, but right now we don't have, shoulder, this person.
Yeah.
It's no, there's a bunch of people that have had to just pick up on these things and you can find them.
Yeah, I remember when I was in the Lower Mainland and I dislocated my shoulder for the first time. There was a shoulder expert that I went to.
Yeah.
And here, it's if you're a shoulder expert, good luck paying your bills, man.
Yeah, you got to be a bit forward. That kind of only works in the city. So.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want to be. I like variety's good.
Yeah.
It keeps you on your toes. So.
Yeah,
Sure.
for sure. Right on.
Awesome.
Well, this is
Thanks for
our.
coming
We
on.
always have a cheers.
You
I got an empty beer. Oh well.
That'll work.
That's all right. That's right. This is
Cheers.
Recording World, episode
Episode
6.